call Jami-Lee Ross.
I move that the question be now put.
I call Phil Twyford.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Because of the rushed and truncated timeframe for this bill, sir, and the fact that it is going to be retrospective, we're in the unusual situation of being here in the committee stages of the bill, and the bill's basically been in operation for the last month. And when QV released their October data last week, it was quite extraordinary because it basically gave us a snapshot of whether or not the bill has had any effect. And of course, the effectiveness of the bill is one of the things that we're debating here, and one of the things that is almost all the submitters at Select Committee put a big question mark over the bill. And what we saw when the numbers came out last week was that prices rose in Auckland in the month of October by 21,500 and hit a new high of $918,000 for the average price. So you have to wonder, sir, whether or not this bill, in all its glory, is being very effective at all, based on its first month in operation. I think one of the most interesting quotes from the submitters was from the senior tax specialist who came along to the Select Committee and said that he was professionally confused by the provisions in this bill. A number of others said the bright line test was a bad idea, incoherent and ineffective. So I think, sir, I think people will be getting a little bit of the drift of the response from submitters at Select Committee. The provision that perhaps demonstrates the level of confusion underlying this bill, I think, is that around the so-called main home. And I'm talking about clauses 6, 15, subclause 5, subclause 10 and subclause 11. And the main home provisions in this bill have carried over from the non-resident foreign buyers bill that was passed recently, this very confusing situation around main home. The bill basically requires that the land in question is used predominantly as the person's main home, that it's used for most of the time as their main home. But in the situation where there is more than one home that could be subject to income tax because it's been sold within the 2-year period, that's where we really start to get into the good stuff in this bill. And what the bill applies is what it calls the greatest connection test to determine which of these two properties is the person's main home. The greatest connection test determines, on an objective basis, which is a bit of an oxymoron in this case, sir, which property is the main home. And it applies the following criteria: the time the person occupies the dwelling, where their immediate family, if any, live, the person's use of the dwelling, the person's employment, business interests and economic ties to the area where the dwelling is located, whether the person's personal property is in the dwelling, and then the coup de grace is where their social ties are strongest. Now, can you imagine how much work this is going to generate for tax lawyers?
Where do they go to the pub?
In the leafy suburbs of Auckland, as they attempt to make sense of these overlapping and vague definitions about which of two homes might have the greatest connection, and therefore which one the person would be able to apply the exception to. So it's completely confused. It doesn't actually use the existing established definitions in other comparable legislation. That would have been much simpler. And the government has chosen to apply the most vaguest, the broadest definitions in this case, provide a little guidance on the side, and hope that somehow that will deal with the sheer complexity and variety of situations that this law will have to be applied to. But, Mr Chairman, the whole issue around main home, it is in fact Mabo, it's the vibe. This bill is a tribute to the castle. And as previous speakers have said, we will be back here fixing this up. It was a rushed, chaotic and hurried political response to the problem of speculation
Chair.
in Auckland.
Mr Chair. Order, I'll just give the House a bit of an indication. We're even starting to hear the jokes repeated now. The fact is that there's been 18 calls from the Labour opposition. There's been another 5 from the other opposition parties and 3 closure motions from the government. Actually, if the new material isn't novel in any way, it won't be lasting long. I have given some latitude, bearing in mind that the guts of the bill is in the first part, and I'm not expecting the second questions to be lasting as long by any means. I call the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove on his third
Mr Chair,
call
I
on
give
this
you an
bill.
absolute commitment.